Hi, I'm Scott Jones, and this is the Attuned Parent Podcast. If parenting your teen feels heavier than you expected, you're not alone. On this podcast, we talk about what's really happening underneath anxiety, defiance, shutdown, and family conflict, using attachment science, nervous system awareness, and practical tools that actually work. Because behavior is protective before it's problematic, and regulated parents increase influence. Let's get started. Hi, welcome back. Today, I want to start with a question. What's a behavior in your teen that frustrates you or worries you the most? Not in some vague way, but in a specific, won't leave you alone in the middle of the night kind of way. You've been watching your teen, and something just keeps saying this isn't just a phase. This isn't just attitude. Something's actually going on. Maybe it's the way they've been quiet over the last few months. Not the normal teenage quiet, but something flatter, further away. Or maybe it's the eruptions that have come out of nowhere and seem to totally be out of proportion to whatever set them off. Maybe it's the way they've just stopped bringing things to you. They've stopped asking for help. They've stopped sharing. They've stopped letting you in. You've probably already been down the what's wrong with my child road. Maybe you even had them evaluated by a professional, or you've talked to their school, or you've spent time on the internet at midnight reading about whatever label seems to fit their behavior you're seeing. Here's what I want to say to you. That instinct that something is going on underneath this, that's right. You're not imagining it. You're not catastrophizing things. But the question isn't whether something is going on. The question is, are you asking the right questions about what that something is? Because what's wrong with my child and what is this behavior telling me look like similar questions, but they're not. They lead you to completely different places. They can produce completely different responses, and they have completely different effects on the relationship with your teen. When you ask what's wrong with your child, you're looking for a diagnosis. But when you ask what is their behavior telling me, you're looking for connection and you're looking for solutions. And that's the shift we're talking about today. So we're going to look at why the first question, as understandable as it is, tends to send you in the wrong direction. And we're going to go into the neuroscience of what's actually happening when your teen acts out, shuts down, or pushes you away. We're going to decode some of the most common and most confusing teen behaviors. And I'm going to give you 3 specific questions you can use in real time to shift from reaction to curiosity. So whether you're listening at home or in your car or in your kitchen, I want you to feel like you're just in my office and we're talking about these things and the concerns you have for your teen. So let's go. So where does that what's wrong with my child question come from? Well, it comes from love. Obviously, it comes from fear, from the desperate need to understand something that isn't making sense. And there's nothing wrong with asking it. The problem is what happens next, where that question tends to send parents and what it might make you miss. When you ask what's wrong with your child, you are implicitly framing the behavior as a defect, something located inside your child that needs to be identified and fixed. And that framing might send you toward a diagnosis or toward labels or toward interventions designed to change the behavior directly. And while often outside help is necessary, the problem with approaching it this way is the behavior is not the thing. The behavior is the signal pointing to the thing. Bruce Perry, one of the foremost researchers in childhood trauma and brain development, makes this distinction with a medical analogy that I really like. He says if a patient comes in with a fever, the doctor doesn't treat the fever as the problem. The fever is the body's response to the problem, to something else, an infection, an inflammation, a system that's under stress. So treating only the fever does not address what's causing it. Your teen's behavior works the same way. The withdrawal, the rage, the defiance, the shutdowns, that's not the illness. That's the fever. That's the nervous system's response to something it is struggling to manage. And when we focus all our energy on making the fever stop, or on changing or punishing or eliminating the behavior, we could miss the infection entirely. The second cost of the wrong question is a little more subtle, but it's just as significant. And it changes how your teen experiences you. Teenagers are really attuned to whether they are being understood or evaluated. When the implicit question in the room is, "What's wrong with you?" they can feel it, even if you don't say it out loud. The teens know when they're being identified as the problem in the family. And that felt experience of being evaluated as a problem produces one of two responses. Either they perform better to get out from under the scrutiny, or they shut down entirely because there's no point trying. And neither of those responses gets you what you really want, which is a teenager who feels safe enough to let you in. The behavior isn't the problem. The behavior is the signal. The problem is what the behavior is pointing to. To understand why behavior is always communication, you need a quick picture of what's happening in your teen's brain and nervous system before things go sideways. The brain is organized from the bottom up, with the most primitive survival-oriented structures at the base and the more complex reasoning structures at the top. The brain stem and midbrain are responsible for basic survival responses like flight, fight, and freeze. They develop first and they are activated the quickest. The limbic system, which processes emotion and memory, sits in the middle, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, empathy, and rational thought, that's at the top. It's the last to develop, and it's the first to go offline under stress. So what that means practically is when your teen is in a heightened state, either they're activated or threatened or overwhelmed, they are always operating from the lower regions of the brain. That prefrontal cortex, which would allow them to say something like, "I'm feeling really anxious right now and I'd like to talk to you about it," it's not available. It's offline. What is available is behavior, action, the body's automatic responses to a nervous system that's under more load than it can manage. In a previous episode, I described 3 states of the autonomic nervous system. The ventral vagal state, that's that safe, connected, open state. The sympathetic state, the mobilized, activated fight or flight. And the dorsal vagal state, that collapsed, shut down, disassociated place. The teen who explodes is in a sympathetic state, and the teen who goes completely flat and unreachable is in a dorsal vagal state. Neither of them is choosing their behavior in any meaningful way. They are in a physiological state that is producing that behavior automatically. Now, I'm not saying that because that's an excuse. It's just an explanation. And the distinction matters enormously because excuses let you off the hook, but explanations tell you where you can intervene. So what your teen has experienced, the stress, the loss, the fear, the accumulated weight of whatever they've been carrying, that is all stored in their nervous system, not just in memory. The behavior is the nervous system speaking in the only language available to it. That's why I always say every behavior makes sense in context. So one of the most practical things I can give you is a different way of reading the behavior that are most likely to trigger a reactive response in you. And I want to walk through 5 of the most common and most misread teen behaviors and maybe offer you a translation of what might really be going on. These are all things that, as a parent of teenagers and working with teenagers for several years, I've experienced over and over. So the first behavior, explosive rage. Rage that's disproportionate to the trigger. This is usually labeled as you're out of control, you're manipulative, you're being dramatic. But what it's usually communicating is I have more emotion in my body than my nervous system knows how to handle. That thing that just happened wasn't just that thing. It landed on top of everything else I've been holding on to. And my window of tolerance is much smaller than it looks like from the outside. So the question you can ask as a parent is, what was already in their system before that trigger? What does this level of response tell me about what they're carrying around? Okay. Next behavior, withdrawal, going quiet, disappearing for hours into their room. That's usually labeled as they're sulking, they're depressed, maybe they're trying to make me pay, they have no social skills, but it might be communicating, I don't have the internal resources to be in connection right now. Being around people, including people I love, costs more than I have. That's not a rejection of you, that's just self-preservation. Unfortunately, it can lead to some really ineffective habits. So the question to ask is, what does my teen's nervous system need right now? Connection or space? And how do I stay present without being intrusive? Okay, next. The behavior is persistent people pleasing. So never expressing needs or opinions. It's usually labeled as, they're really easy to get along with. They're low maintenance. They're fine. What it's usually communicating is, I learned somewhere that it isn't safe to have needs. Making other people making other people comfortable is how I stay okay. And my feelings are somewhere below the surface where I put them for protection. The question as a parent you need to be asking is, what has this child learned about what happens when they bring the real stuff into the room? And am I the one creating the conditions where that stuff can emerge? Next, we have the behavior of defiance, just refusing to comply with any reasonable request. That's usually labeled as disrespectful, testing limits, needs more consequences. What it could be communicating is several things depending on the context. Sometimes it's, I need to feel like I have some control in my life, and this is the only place I have it. Or it might be, I don't trust that this relationship is safe enough for me to have to comply without losing myself. Or it could be, I'm trying to see if you'll stay around when I'm hard to be around. So the question to ask as a parent is, what does this defiance tell me about my teen's relationship to control, to safety, or trust? And what need is the resistance protecting? And finally, we have apathy. Just nothing seems to matter. Low motivation across the board. That's usually labeled as lazy, unmotivated, just doesn't care. It might be communicating, I've disconnected from the things that used to be meaningful because feeling disconnected hurts less than wanting the things I'm afraid I won't get. Or it could be, I'm in a dorsal vagal shutdown where the nervous system has just conserved all the available energy. That's not laziness. That's just a total system collapse. So as a parent, I should be asking, when did this disengagement start? What was happening in their life around that time? And what was the last thing they genuinely cared about? Your child probably isn't giving you a hard time. Your child is just having a hard time. So knowing that behavior is communication is one thing, but being able to shift from reaction to curiosity in real time, when you're activated yourself, when that behavior is directed at you, maybe when you've just heard something from your teenager that really stung, Well, that's another thing entirely. So these three questions that I'm going to give you, they're tools. They're not scripts. They're not things you say out loud necessarily, though you might sometimes. They are things you ask yourself in the moment as a way of interpreting the automatic responses that you might have. And it gives you a second choice. Okay. So, question number one, what state is their nervous system in right now? Before you interpret behavior, locate it physiologically. Is your teen activated? Are they being loud? Are they escalated? That's sympathetic. Are they flat, checked out, unreachable? That's dorsal. Or are they present, making contact with you, willing to engage? That's ventral. This matters because the state tells you what's possible for you as a parent. You cannot have a productive conversation with a teen in a sympathetic state. Their prefrontal cortex is offline. And you cannot reach a teen in a dorsal state with intensity or pressure. The state is the first piece of information. It tells you whether this is a moment for co-regulation, for space, or connection. Question number two. What is the oldest version of this behavior? Meaning that this is a developmental question. This asks us to consider behavior in the context of what was happening in a child's life when a particular pattern was learned. Trauma-adapted behaviors make sense once in an environment where that was unpredictable or threatening or emotionally unavailable. It was the right response to that environment. The problem is that they get carried into other environments that are safer and where they no longer serve a purpose. So when you ask, what's the oldest version of this behavior? Where did my teen first learn to respond this way? You stop treating the behavior as a present tense character flaw and start understanding it as historical data. It's an adaptation. And that shift changes how you respond. Question three, what does this behavior need from me right now? Not how do I make this behavior go away? Not what consequences are appropriate. Those questions have a place, but they're not the first question. The first question is, what does this nervous system communicating through this behavior actually need? Sometimes the answer is co-regulation. They need a calm, steady, non-reactive presence that their dysregulated system can borrow from. Sometimes the answer is space. No pressure, no demands, just proximity without expectation. And sometimes the answer is a very specific acknowledgement. I see that something is wrong. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not going to push, but I'm here and I'm concerned and I love you. The behavior is asking for something. And so getting curious about what that something is rather than immediately responding to the behavior, that is what it means to be a trauma-informed parent. So curiosity is not the soft option. It's often the harder option, but it's the more effective one. I want to address something that I know is going to come up. When I talk about understanding behavior as communication, about getting curious instead of reactive, and about looking for what's underneath, what some parents hear is, let everything go. You're just expecting me to have no limits, no consequences. Just validate everything your teen does. That is not what I'm saying. And it wouldn't serve your teen if that was what I was saying. The frame I'd offer is this: understanding and accountability are not opposite. You can hold both at the same time. In fact, the most effective versions of accountability requires understanding first, because accountability that lands is accountability that the team experiences as fair and connected to something real, not as just a punishment handed down by someone who doesn't get what's going on. So the difference between a consequence delivered by an activated protective part in you, that reactive, disconnected, escalating part, and a consequence delivered from a self that's grounded, clear, caring, and firm, that's really important. And that's a big difference. So the words might be the same, but the impact is completely different. This means that the sequence matters. Curiosity and understanding come first. They create the conditions in which accountability can actually be heard. And when a teen feels seen and understood, when the implicit message is, I know something real is going on for you, they're far more likely to be able to receive a limit or a consequence without it leading to another rupture. So you don't have to choose between being an understanding parent and being a parent with standards. You're just sequencing those things correctly. Your teen needs both. So let me tell you what actually changes when parents make this shift consistently over time. The first thing that changes is in you. It's your own nervous system. When you are in the what's wrong with my child frame, you're in a problem solving, threat response state. You're activated, you're bracing, you're scanning for threats, you're looking for what's broken. But when you shift to curiosity, your own nervous system is going to settle. And as we've talked about in all of these sessions, your teen's nervous system is going to read your nervous system, and your regulation is contagious. The second thing that changes is your teen's experience of being known. Over time, the consistent message, I'm paying attention to what you're showing me, not just judging what you're doing, becomes something your teen can internalize. They begin to believe that they don't have to have the right words or be perfect for you, and that their behavior won't be used against them, that someone is actually trying to understand them in a world where they often feel misunderstood. And the third thing that changes is the relationship's capacity for honesty. When your teen trusts that curiosity will be met with curiosity rather than correction, they begin to bring more to the table. Maybe not all at once, maybe not in some dramatic way, but slowly and incrementally in small bits that are easy to miss if you're not paying attention, but they will bring more. That means when your teenager is struggling with a behavior that you might not be okay with, they are more likely to be willing to talk to you about it, to address it early before it becomes a real problem. A secure base is built through consistent effort, not perfection, but through accumulated evidence of a parent who keep asking the right questions. So here's something that I just want to leave with you, and you can come back to this over and over. Your teen is communicating with you constantly. It's not always in words. It's not always in ways that are easy to receive, but all behavior is communication. Every behavior, the ones that worry you, the ones that frustrate you, the ones that keep you up at night, that's all part of the communication. So the question is whether you're asking the right kinds of questions when you hear it. What's wrong with my child is a question about a defect. It sends you towards fixing. And over time, teens build resentment towards being treated as a problem. Asking the question, what is this behavior telling me? That is about the message. It sends you towards understanding. And understanding is where connection lives. And connection, as we've said in almost every episode, connection is the mechanism. The relationship is the intervention. It's not the reward you get after you solve the problem. It's the condition under which problems get solved. So 3 questions to take with you. What state is their nervous system in right now? What is the oldest version of this behavior? Where was it learned? And what does this behavior need from me right now? So what I want you to do is get curious. Keep showing up. And remember, your teen doesn't need a perfect parent. They just need a connected one. And you're probably doing a lot better than you think. So I want to thank you for being here. I hope that these sessions feel like you're sitting in my office and we're just having a conversation. If this episode helped you see your teen a little differently, share it with a parent who might be stuck in a what's wrong with my child loop. Share it with someone who loves their kid and just needs to start asking different questions. And follow the Attuned Parent podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating. And if your family needs more support than these conversations can provide, Stillwater Academy's contact information is in the show notes. I appreciate you for listening. We'll see you next time.